No, I'm sure. I was a little offended for myself, and even more indignant for the but a lot of the time they come back to me without having seen anyone. No doctors, no nurses, no one. These people are not feigning illness, you think? No, I'm sure. I was a little offended for myself, and even more indignant for the slum dwellers. They've got nothing to gain by pretending to be sick. And they're proud people. They don't ask for help lightly. Of course, he murmured, removing his glasses to rub at the deep ridges they'd imposed on his nose. And have you been to the St. George yourself? Have you seen anyone there to ask them about this? Yes. I went there twice. They told me they're swamped with patients, and they do the best they can. They suggested that if I could get referrals from licensed medical practitioners, then the slum dwellers could jump the queue, so to speak. I'm not complaining about them at the St. George. They've got their own problems. They're understaffed and overcrowded. In my little clinic, I look at about 50 patients a day. They get 600 patients every day. Sometimes as many as 1,000. I'm sure you know how it is. I think they're doing the best they can, and they're pushed to the limit just trying to treat the emergency cases. The real problem is that my people can't afford to see a real doctor, to get the referral that would help them jump the queue at the hospital. They're too poor. That's why they come to me. Dr. Hamid raised his eyebrows and offered me that easy smile. You said my people. Are you becoming such an Indian, Mr. Lin? I laughed and answered him in Hindi for the first time, using a line from the theme song to a popular movie that was showing, then, in many cinemas. In this life, we do what we can to improve ourselves. Hamid also laughed, clapping his hands together once in pleased surprise. Well, Mr. Lin, I think I may be able to help you. I am on duty here 2 days a week, but the rest of the time I can be found at my surgery in 4th Posta Lane. I know 4th Posta Lane. That's very close to us.
Precisely, and, after speaking to Kaderbai, I have agreed that you should begin referring your patients to me, when you need it, and I will arrange treatment at St. George Hospital when I think it is required.
We can begin from tomorrow, if you wish. Yes, I do, I said quickly. I mean, it's great, thank you very much. I don't know how we're going to go about paying you, but... No need for thanks, and no need to worry about payment, he replied, glancing at Abdullah. My services will be free for your people. Perhaps you would like to join me for tea? I take a break here soon. There is a restaurant across the road from the hospital. If you can wait for me there, I will come across and join you.
We have, I think, much to discuss.
Abdullah and I left him, and waited for 20 minutes in the restaurant, watching through a large window as poor patients hobbled to the entrance of the hospital, and rich patients were delivered in taxis and private cars. Dr. Hamid joined us, and outlined the procedures I was to follow in referring the slum dwellers to his practice in 4th Posta Lane. Good doctors have at least 3 things in common. They know how to observe, they know how to listen, and they're very tired. Hamid was a good doctor, and when, after an hour of discussion, I looked into his prematurely lined face, the eyes burned and reddened by lack of sleep, I felt shamed by his honest exhaustion. He could accumulate wealth, I knew, and surround himself with luxury in private practice in Germany or Canada or America, yet he chose to be there, with his own people, for a fraction of the reward. He was one of thousands of health professionals working in the city, with careers as distinguished in what they denied themselves as in what they achieved every working day. And what they achieved was no less than the survival of the city. When Abdullah took us into the plated traffic once more, his bike weaving a haphazard progress through the threads of buses, cars, trucks, bicycles, bullock wagons, and pedestrians, he called over his shoulder to tell me that Dr. Hamid had once lived in a slum himself.
He said that Kaderbai had taken especially gifted slum children from several slums throughout the city, and paid for their enrollment in private colleges.
Through secondary and then tertiary studies, the children were provided for and encouraged. They graduated to become physicians, surgeons, nurses, teachers, lawyers, and engineers. Hamid was one of those gifted children who'd been selected more than 20 years before. In response to the needs of my small clinic, Qadrbai was calling in some dues. Qadrbai is a man who makes the future, Abdullah concluded, as we stopped for a traffic signal. Most of us, me and you, my brother, we wait for the future to come to us. But Abdul Qadir Khan dreams the future, and then he plans it, and then he makes it happen. That is the difference between him and the rest of us. What about you, Abdullah? I asked him in a shout as we roared off with the traffic once more. Did Qadrbai plan you? He laughed out loud, his chest heaving with the pleasure and the force of the laugh. I think he did, he replied. Hey, this isn't the way back to the slum. Where are we going now? We are going to visit the place where you will be getting your medicines. My what? Qadrbai has arranged for you to get medicines every week. The things I brought you today, those are the first. We are going to the medicine black market. A black market for medicine? Where is it? In the slum of the lepers, Abdullah answered, matter-of-factly. Then he laughed again as he pushed the bike to greater speed through a gap in the traffic that opened for him, even as he reached it. Just leave it to me, Lin brother. Now you are part of the plan, isn't it so? Those words, now you are part of the plan, should have woken some fear in me. I should have sensed something, even then, right at the start. But I wasn't afraid. I was almost happy. The words seemed exciting. They rushed my blood. When my fugitive life began, I was exiled from my family, homeland, and culture. I thought that was the whole of it. Years into the banishment, I realized that I was exiled to something as well. What I escaped to was the lonely, reckless freedom of the outcast. Like outcasts everywhere, I courted danger because danger was one of the few things strong enough to help me forget what I'd lost. And staring into the warmth of the afternoon wind, riding with Abdullah into the web of streets, I fell as fearlessly into my fate, that afternoon, as a man falls into love with a shy woman's best smile. The journey to the lepers' camp took us to the outskirts of the city. There were several treatment colonies for Bombay's lepers, but the men and women we went to see refused to live in them. Funded by state and private contributions, the colonies provided medical attention, caring support, and clean environments. The rules and regulations that governed them were strict, however, and not all the lepers could bring themselves to conform. As a result, some chose to leave, and some were forced out. At any one time, a few dozen men, women, and children lived outside the colonies, in the wider community of the city.
The elastic tolerance of slum dwellers, who accommodated every caste and race and condition of person within their sprawl of huts, rarely extended to lepers.
Local councils and street committees didn't endure their presence for long. Feared and shunned, the lepers formed themselves into mobile slums that settled, within an hour, in any open space they could find, and made a traceless departure in even less time. Sometimes they established themselves for several weeks beside a rubbish dump, fending off the permanent rag pickers, who resisted their incursion. At other times they set up their camp on a swampy patch of vacant land or some outfall for industrial waste. When I first visited them with Abdullah, that day, I found that they'd built their ragged shelters on the rusty stones of a railway siding near the suburb of Kar. We were forced to park Abdullah's bike, and enter the railway land as the lepers did, through gaps in fences and across ditches.
The rusty plateau was a staging area for most trains on the urban route and many of the goods wagons carrying produce and manufactured articles out of the city.
Beyond the substation itself were office outbuildings, storage warehouses, and maintenance sheds. Further on was a vast shunting area, an open space marked by dozens of railway lines and their confluences. At the outer edges, high wire fences enclosed the space. Outside was the commerce and coziness of suburban Kar, traffic and gardens, balconies and bazaars. Within was the aridity of function and systems. There were no plants, no animals, and no people. Even the rolling stock were ghost trains, trundling from shunting stop to shunting stop without staff or passengers. Then there was the lepers' slum.
They'd seized a diamond of clear space between the tracks for themselves, and patched their shelters together in it.
None of the huts was taller than my chest. From a distance, they looked like the pup tents of an army bivouac wreathed in the smoke of cooking fires. As we neared them, however, we saw that their appalling raggedness made the slum huts where I lived seem like solid, comfortable structures.
They were made from scraps of cardboard and plastic held aloft with crooked branches, and braced with thin string.
I could have knocked the whole camp to rubble with an open hand, and it would have taken me less than a minute, yet 30 men, women, and children made their lives there. We entered the slum unchallenged, and made our way to one of the huts near the center. People stopped and stared at us, but no one spoke. It was hard not to look at them, and then hard not to stare when I did look. Some of the people had no noses, most of them had no fingers, the feet of many were bound in bloody bandages, and some were so advanced into the deteriorations that their lips and ears were missing. I don't know why, the price, perhaps, that women pay for their loveliness, but the disfigurements seemed more ghastly for the women than they were for the men. Many of the men had a defiant and even a jaunty air about them, a kind of pugnacious ugliness that was fascinating in itself. But shyness just looked cowed in the women, and hunger looked predatory. The disease was indiscernible in the many children I saw. They looked fit, if uniformly thin, and quite well. And they worked hard, all of those children. Their small fingers did the grasping for the whole of their tribe. They'd seen us coming, and must have passed the word because, as we approached the hut, a man crawled out and stood to greet us.
2 children came at once and supported him.
He was tiny, reaching to just above my waist, and severely stricken with the disease. His lips and the lower part of his face were eaten away to a hard, knobby ridge of dark flesh that extended downwards from the cheeks to the hinges of his jaw. The jaw itself was exposed, as were the teeth and gums, and the gaping holes where his nose had been. "Abdullah, my son," he said, in Hindi. "How are you? Have you eaten?" "I am well, Ranjit Bhai."
Abdullah replied in respectful tones.
"I have brought the Gora to meet you. We have just now eaten, but we will drink tea, thank you." Children brought stools to us, and we sat there in the open space in front of Ranjit's hut. A small crowd gathered and sat on the ground, or stood around us. "This is Ranjit Bhai," Abdullah told me, in Hindi, speaking loudly enough for all to hear. "He is the boss here, the senior fellow, in the slum of the lepers. He is the king here, in this club for Kala Topis."
Kala topi means black hat in Hindi, and it's a phrase used, sometimes, to describe a thief, referring to the black banded hats that convicted thieves were forced to wear in Bombay's Arthur Road prison.
I wasn't sure exactly what Abdullah had meant by the remark, but Ranjit and the other lepers took it well enough, smiling and repeating the phrase several times. "Greetings, Ranjit Bhai," I said, in Hindi. "My name is Lin. Up Dr. Hain?" he asked. "You are a doctor?" "No." I almost shouted in panic, disconcerted by the disease and my ignorance of it, and afraid he would ask me to help them. I turned to Abdullah and switched to English. "Tell him I'm not a doctor, Abdullah. Tell him I just do a little first aid, and treat rat bites and scratches caused by the barbed wire, and things like that. Explain to him. Tell him that I haven't had any real training, and I don't know the first thing about leprosy." Abdullah nodded, and then faced Ranjit Bhai. "Yes," he said, "he is a doctor. Thank you very much, Abdullah," I gnashed out through clenched teeth. Children brought full glasses of water for us, and tea in chipped cups. Abdullah drank his water in quick gulps. Ranjit tilted his head back, and one of the children tipped the water in a gurgle down his throat. I hesitated, fearful of the grotesque sickness around me. One of the slum words in Hindi for lepers can be translated as the undead, and I felt that I was holding the nightmares of the undead in my hands. All the world of suffering disease was concentrated in that glass of water, it seemed to me. But Abdullah had drunk his glass. I was sure he'd calculated the risks, and decided it was safe. And every day of my life was a risk. Every hour had its hazards, after the big gamble of escape from prison. The voluptuous recklessness of a fugitive moved my arm to my mouth, and I drank the water down. 40 pairs of eyes watched me drink. Ranjit's own eyes were honey-colored, and clouded by what I judged to be incipient cataracts. He examined me closely, those eyes roving from my feet to my hair and back, several times, with unshy curiosity. Kotterbai has told me that you need medicines, he said slowly in English.
His teeth clicked together as he spoke, and with no lips to help him form the words, his speech was difficult to understand. The letters B, F, P, and V were impossible, for example, with M and W coming out as other sounds altogether.
The mouth forms more than just words, of course. It forms attitudes and moods and nuances of meaning, and those expressive hints were also missing. And he had no fingers, so even that aid to communication was denied him. Instead, there was a child, perhaps his son, who stood at his shoulder and repeated his words in a quiet but steady voice, one beat behind the rhythm of his speech, just as a translator might. "We are always happy to help Lord Abdul-Kader," the two voices said. "I have the honor to serve him. We can give you much medicine, every week, no problem. First-class stuff, as you see." He shouted a name, then, and a tall boy in his early teens pushed through the crowd to lay a canvas bundle at my feet. He knelt to roll out the canvas, and revealed a collection of ampules and plastic bottles. There was morphine hydrochloride, penicillin, and antibiotics for staph and strep infections. The containers were labeled and new. "Where do they get this stuff?" I asked Abdullah as I examined the medicines. "They steal it," he answered me, in Hindi. "Steal it? How do they steal it?" "Bau Hoshiar," he replied. "Very cleverly." Yes, yes. A chorus of voices surrounded us. There was no humor in that concord. They accepted Abdullah's praise solemnly, as if he was admiring some work of art they'd collectively produced. "Good thieves, clever thieves," I heard people mutter around me. "What do they do with it?" "They sell it on the black market," he told me, still speaking in Hindi, so that all those present could follow our conversation. "They survive nicely from this, and other very good stealing." "I don't get it. Why would anyone buy medicine from them? You can buy this stuff from just about any chemist. You want to know everything, Brother Lin, isn't it? Well then, we must have another cup of tea, because this is a 2 cups of tea story." The crowd laughed at that, and pressed a little closer, picking out places to sit near us for the story. A large, empty, unattended goods wagon rumbled past slowly on an adjacent track, perilously close to the huts. No one gave it more than a cursory glance.
A railway worker, dressed in khaki shirt and shorts, strolled between the lines, inspecting the rails.
He looked up at the lepers' camp from time to time, but his mild curiosity faded as he passed us, and he never looked back. Our tea arrived, and we sipped it as Abdullah began his story. Several of the children were sitting against our legs, their arms wrapped around one another companionably. One little girl slipped her arm around my right leg, and hugged me with artless affection. Abdullah spoke in very simple Hindi, repeating some passages in English, when he perceived that I hadn't understood. He began by talking of the British Raj, the time when Europeans controlled all of India from the Khyber Pass to the Bay of Bengal. The Ferengi, the foreigners, he said, gave lepers the lowest priority on their scale of privileges and entitlements. As the last in line, lepers often missed out on the limited supply of medicines, bandages, and medical treatment. When famine or flood struck, even the traditional medicines and herbal remedies were in short supply. The lepers became skilled at stealing what they couldn't obtain by other means, so skilled, in fact, that they accumulated surpluses, and began to sell medicines in their own black market. In India's vastness, Abdullah went on, there were always conflicts, brigandage, rebellions, wars. Men fought, and blood was spilled. But many more men died through the festering of wounds and the ravages of disease than were killed in battles. One of the best sources of intelligence available to police forces and governments lay in the control of medicines, bandages, and expertise. All sales from chemists, hospital pharmacies, and pharmaceutical wholesalers were registered. Any purchase or string of purchases significantly greater than the established norm attracted attention that sometimes led to captures or killings. A telltale trail of medicines, particularly of antibiotics, had led to the downfall of many dacoits and revolutionaries. In their black market, however, the lepers asked no questions and sold to anyone who could pay. Their networks and secret markets existed in every great city in India. Their customers were terrorists, infiltrators, separatists, or just more than usually ambitious outlaws. These people are dying, Abdullah concluded, with the colorful turn of phrase that I was learning to expect from him, and they steal life for themselves, and then they sell life to others who are dying. When Abdullah finished speaking, there was a dense and ponderous silence. Everyone looked at me. They seemed to want some response, some reaction, to the story of their sadness and skill, their cruel isolation and violent indispensability. Whistling hisses of breath came through the clenched teeth of lipless mouths. Patient, serious eyes fixed me with expectant concentration. Can I have another glass of water, please? I asked, in Hindi, and it must have been the right thing to say because the whole crowd started laughing. Several children rushed off to fetch the water, and a number of hands patted me on the back and shoulder. Ranjitbai explained, then, how Sunil, the boy who'd showed us the canvas bundle of medicines, would make deliveries to my hut in the slum as and when I required them. Before we could leave, he asked that I remain seated for a while longer. Then he directed every man, woman, and child in his group to come forward and touch my feet. It was mortifying, a torment, and I entreated him not to do it. He insisted. A stern, almost severe expression burned in his eyes, while the lepers hobbled forward, one by one, and tapped their leathery stumps or the blackened, curled claws of their fingernails to my feet. An hour later, Abdullah parked his bike near the World Trade Center. We stood together for a moment, and then he reached out impulsively and enclosed me in a warm, bearish hug. I laughed as we came apart, and he frowned at me, clearly puzzled. Is it funny? He asked. No, I reassured him. I just wasn't expecting a bear hug, that's all. Bear? Do you mean it is naked? No, we call that a bear hug, I explained, gesturing with my hands, as if they were claws. Bears, you know, the furry animals that eat honey and sleep in caves. When you hold someone like that, we say you're giving them a bear hug. Caves? Sleeping in caves? It's okay. Don't worry about it. I liked it. It was good friendship. It was what friends do, in my country, giving a bear hug like that. My brother, he said, with an easy smile, I will see you tomorrow, with Sunil, from the lepers, with new medicine. He rode off, and I walked alone into the slum. I looked around me, and that place I'd once regarded as grievously forlorn seemed sturdy, vital, a miniature city of boundless hope and possibility. The people, as I passed them, were robust and invigorated. I sat down in my hut, with the thin plywood door closed, and I cried. Suffering, Khaderbai once told me, is the way we test our love, especially our love for God. I didn't know God, as he'd put it, but even as a disbeliever I failed the test that day. I couldn't love God, anyone's God, and I couldn't forgive God. The tears stopped after a few minutes, but it was the first time I'd cried for too long, and I was still deep in the mud of it when Prabhakar came into my hut and squatted down beside me. He is a danger man, Lynn, he said without preamble. What? This Abdullah fellow, who came here today. He is a very danger man. You are better not for any knowing of him. And doings with him are even worsely dangerous, also. What are you talking about? He is. Prabhakar paused, and the struggle was explicit in his gentle, open face.
He is a killing man, Lynn.
A murdering fellow. He is killing the people for money. He is a gunda, a gangster fellow, for Khaderbai. Everybody knows this. Everybody, except of you. I knew it was true without asking any more, without a shred of proof beyond Prabhakar's word. It's true, I said in my mind. In saying it, I realized that I'd always known or suspected it. It was in the way other people treated him, the whispers he inspired, and the fear I'd seen in so many of the eyes that looked into his. It was in the ways that Abdullah was like the best and most dangerous men I'd known in prison. That, or something like that, had to be true. I tried to think clearly about what he was, and what he did, and what my relationship to him should or shouldn't be. Khaderbai was right, of course. Abdullah and I were very much alike. We were men of violence, when violence was required, and we weren't afraid to break the law. We were both outlaws. We were both alone in the world. And Abdullah, like me, was ready to die for any reason that seemed good enough on the day. But I'd never killed anyone. In that, we were different men. Still, I liked him. I thought of that afternoon at the lepers' slum, and I recalled how self-assured I'd been there with Abdullah. I knew that a part of whatever equanimity I'd managed to display, perhaps most of it, had really been his. With him I'd been strong and able to cope. He was the first man I'd met, since the escape from prison, who'd had that effect on me. He was the kind of man that tough criminals call a 100%er. The kind of man who'll put his life on the line if he calls you his friend. The kind who'll put his shoulder beside yours, without question or complaint, and stand with you against any odds. Because men like that are so often the heroes in films and books, we forget how rare they're in the real world. But I knew. It was one of the things that prison taught me. Prison pulls the masks away from men. You can't hide what you are, in prison. You can't pretend to be tough. You are, or you're not, and everyone knows it. And when the knives came out against me, as they did more than once, and it was kill or be killed, I learned that only one man in hundreds will stand with you, to the end, in friendship's name. Prison also taught me how to recognize those rare men when I met them. I knew that Abdullah was such a man. In my hunted exile, biting back the fear, ready to fight and die every haunted day, the strength and wildness and will that I found in him were more, and better, than all the truth and goodness in the world. And sitting there in my hut, striped with hot white light and cooling shadows, I pledged myself to him as brother and friend, no matter what he'd done, and no matter what he was. I looked up into Prabaker's worried face, and smiled. He smiled back at me, reflexively, and in an instant of unusual clarity I saw that, for him, I was the one who inspired something of that confidence. As Abdullah was to me, so was I to Prabaker. Friendship is also a kind of medicine, and the markets for it, too, are sometimes black. Don't worry, I said, reaching out to put a hand on his shoulder. It'll be all right. It'll be fine. Nothing's going to happen to me. Chapter 11.
The long days, working in the slum and grinding commissions from the hard, jeweled eyes of tourists, unfolded one upon another through the tumble of crowded hours like lotus petals in a summer dawn.
There was always a little money, and sometimes a lot of it. On one afternoon, a few weeks after that first visit to the lepers, I fell in with a party of Italian tourists who planned to sell drugs to other tourists at some of the bigger dance parties in Goa. With my help, they bought 4 kilos of charas and 2,000 mandrakes tablets. I liked doing illegal business with Italians. They were single-minded and systematic in the pursuit of their pleasures, and stylish in the practice of their business. They were also generous, for the most part, believing in a fair minute's pay for a fair minute's work. The commission on that deal gave me enough money to retire for a few weeks. The slum absorbed my days, and most of my nights. It was late April then, only a little more than a month before the monsoon. The slum dwellers were busy making preparations for the coming of the rain. There was a quiet urgency in the work. We all knew what troubles the darkening sky would bring. Yet there was happiness in every lane, and excitement in the easy smiles of the young ones because, after the hot, dry months, all of us were hungry for clouds. Qasim Ali Hussein appointed Prabaker and Johnny Cigar as the leaders of 2 teams who were responsible for helping widows, orphans, disabled people, and abandoned wives to repair their huts. Prabaker won the assistance of a few willing lads to gather bamboo poles and small lengths of timber from the piles of scrap at the construction site beside our slum. Johnny Cigar chose to organize several street kids into a marauding band of pirates who plundered the neighborhood for pieces of tin, canvas, and plastic. All manner of things that might be used as weatherproofing materials began to vanish from the vicinity of the slum. One notable expedition by the tiny pilferers produced a huge tarpaulin that, from its shape, had clearly been the camouflage cover for a battle tank. That piece of military software was cut into 9 pieces, and used to protect as many huts. I joined a team of young men who'd been given the task of clearing the drains and gullies of snarls and snags. Months of neglect had filled those places with an accumulation of cans and plastic bottles and jars. Everything that rats wouldn't eat and that scavengers hadn't found. It was dirty work, and I was glad to do it. It took me to every corner of the slum, and introduced me to hundreds of people I might otherwise never have known. And there was a certain kudos in the job. Humble and important tasks were as esteemed in the slum as they were reviled in the wider community. All the teams who worked to defend the huts from the coming rain were rewarded with love. We only had to lift our heads from the filthy drains to find ourselves in a luxuriant garden of smiles. As head man in the slum, Qasim Ali Hussein was involved in every plan and decision in those preparations. His authority was clear and unquestioned, but it was a subtle, unobtrusive leadership. An incident that occurred in those weeks before the rain brought me into the ambit of his wisdom, and revealed to me why it was so widely revered. A group of us had gathered in Qasim Ali's hut one afternoon to hear his eldest son tell stories of his adventures in Kuwait. Iqbal, a tall, muscular 24-year-old with an honest stare and a shy smile, had recently returned after 6 months of work as a contract laborer in Kuwait. Many of the young men were eager to gain from his experience. What were the best jobs? Who were the best masters? Who were the worst ones? How did you make extra money between the flourishing black markets of the Gulf states and those of Bombay? Iqbal held impromptu classes every afternoon for a week in the main room of his father's hut, and the crowd spilled out into the forecourt to share in his precious knowledge. On that day, however, his discourses were interrupted abruptly by shouts and screaming. We rushed out of the hut and ran towards the sound. Not far away, we discovered a noisy mob of men, women, and children. We pushed our way to the center, where 2 young men were wrestling and punching at one another.
Their names were Farouk and Raghuram.
They were from the team that was helping Prabhakar to gather poles and lengths of wood. Iqbal and Johnny Cigar separated the combatants, and Qasim Ali stepped between them, his presence quieting the raucous crowd at once. "What is happening here?" he asked, his voice unusually stern. "Why are you fighting?" "The Prophet, may Allah grant him peace." Farouk shouted. "He insulted the Prophet, and he insulted the Lord Ram." Raghuram countered. The crowd supported one or the other with shrieks and condemnations. Qasim Ali gave them half a minute of noise, and then raised his hands for silence. "Farouk, Raghuram, you two are friends, good friends," he said. "You know that fighting is no way to settle your differences. And you both know that fighting between friends and neighbors is the worst fighting of all. But the Prophet, peace be upon him. Raghu insulted the Prophet. I had to fight with him," Farouk whined.
He was still angry, but Qasim Ali's hard stare was causing him to wilt, and he couldn't meet the older man's eye.
"And what of insulting the Lord Ram?" Raghuram protested. "Isn't that also a reason to?" "There is no excuse," Qasim Ali thundered, silencing every voice. "There is no reason that is good enough to make us fight with each other. We are all poor men here. There are enemies enough for all of us outside this place. We live together, or we die."
"You 2 young fools have hurt our people, your own people."
"You have hurt all of our people, of every faith, and you have shamed me terribly." The crowd had grown to more than 100 people. Qasim's words caused a stir of rumbling comments that rippled through them, as heads touched together. Those closest to him, at the center, repeated what he'd said, relaying the message to others at the edges of the group. Farouk and Raghuram hung their heads wretchedly. Qasim Ali's charge that they'd shamed him, rather than themselves, was a telling blow. "You must both be punished for this," Qasim said, a little more gently, when the crowd was quieter. "Your parents and I will choose a punishment for you tonight. Until then, you will work for the rest of the day at cleaning the area around the latrine." New murmurs buzzed through the crowd. Conflicts based on religion were potentially dangerous, and people were glad to see that Qasim took the matter seriously. Many of the voices around me spoke of the friendship between Farouk and Raghuram, and I realized that what Qasim had said was true. The fighting between close friends of different faiths had hurt the community. Then Qasim Ali removed the long green scarf that he wore around his neck, and held it aloft for all to see. "You will work in the latrine now. But first, Farouk and Raghuram, I will bind you together with this, my scarf." It will remind you that you are friends and brothers, while cleaning the latrine will fill your noses with the stink of what you have done to each other today. He knelt then, and tied the two young men together at the ankle, Farouk's right to Raghuram's left. When it was done, he stood and told them to go, pointing with outstretched arm in the direction of the latrine. The crowd parted for them, and the young men tried to walk, but they stumbled at first, and soon realized that they had to hold on tightly and walk in step if they were to make any progress at all. They clasped their arms around one another and hobbled away on three legs. The crowd watched them walk, and began to chatter in praise of Qasim Ali's wisdom. Suddenly there was laughter where a minute before there'd been tension and fear. People turned to speak to him, but discovered that Qasim was already walking back to his hut. I was close enough to him to see that he was smiling. I was lucky, and shared that smile often in those months. Qasim visited my hut 2 and sometimes 3 times a week, checking on my progress with the increasing number of patients who came to me after Dr. Hamid began to accept my referrals. Occasionally, the headman brought someone with him, a child who'd been bitten by rats, or a young man who'd been injured at the construction site beside the slum. After a while, I realized that they were people he'd chosen to bring to me, personally, because for one reason or another they were reluctant to come alone. Some were simply shy, some had resentments against foreigners and refused to trust them. Others were unwilling to try any form of medicine other than traditional, village remedies. I had some trouble with the village remedies. In the main I approved of them, and even adopted them wherever it was possible, preferring some of the Ayurvedic medicines to their Western pharmaceutical equivalents. Some treatments, however, seemed to be based on obscure superstitions rather than therapeutic traditions, and they were as contrary to common sense as they were to any notions of medical science. The practice of applying a colored tourniquet of herbs to the upper arm as a cure for syphilis, for example, struck me as particularly counterproductive. Arthritis and rheumatism were sometimes treated by taking cherry red coals from the fire with metal tongs, and holding them against the knees and elbows of the sufferer. Qasim Ali told me, privately, that he didn't approve of the more extreme remedies, but he didn't prohibit them. Instead, he visited me regularly, and because the people loved him, they followed his example and came to me in greater numbers. Qasim Ali's nut-brown skin, stretched over his lean and sinewy body, was as smooth and taut as a boxer's glove. His thick, silver-gray hair was short, and he sported a goatee beard one shade lighter than his hair. He most often wore a cotton kurta and plain, white, Western-style trousers. Although they were simple, inexpensive clothes, they were always freshly washed and ironed, and he changed them twice every day. Another man, a less revered man with similar habits of dress, would have been considered something of a dandy. But Qasim Ali raised smiles of love and admiration wherever he went in the slum. His immaculately clean, white clothes seemed to all of us a symbol of his spirituality and moral integrity, qualities we depended on, in that little world of struggle and hope, no less urgently than we depended on the water from the communal well. His 55 years sat lightly on his taller-than-average frame. More than once, I watched him and his young son run from the water tanks to their hut with heavy containers of water hoisted onto their shoulders, and they were neck and neck all the way. When he sat down on the reed mats, in the main room of his hut, he did so without touching his hands to the ground. He crossed his feet over and then lowered himself to a sitting position by bending his knees. He was a handsome man, and a great part of his beauty derived from the healthy vitality and natural grace that supported his inspirational and commanding wisdom. With his short, silver-gray hair, lean figure, and deeply resonant voice, Qasim reminded me often of Qadrbhai. I learned, some time later, that the two powerful men knew each other well, and were in fact close friends. But there were considerable differences between them, and perhaps none more significant than the authority of their leadership, and how they'd come by it. Qasim was given his power by a people who loved him. Qadrbhai had seized his power, and held it by strength of will and force of arms. And in the contrast of powers, it was the mafia lords that dominated. The people of the slum chose Qasim Ali as their leader and headman, but it was Qadrbhai who'd approved the choice, and who'd allowed it to happen. Qasim was called upon to exercise his power frequently because his was the only real day-to-day authority in the slum. He resolved those disputes that had escalated into conflicts. He mediated claims and counterclaims concerning property and rights of access. And many people simply sought his advice about everything from employment to marriages. Qasim had 3 wives. His first wife, Fatima, was 2 years younger than he was. His second wife, Shayla, was younger by 10 years. His third wife, Najima, was only 28 years old. His first marriage had been for love. The 2 subsequent marriages were to poor widows who might not otherwise have found new husbands. The wives bore him 10 children between them, 4 sons and 6 daughters, and there were 5 other children who'd come to him with the widowed wives. To give the women financial independence, he bought 4-foot treadle sewing machines for them. His first wife, Fatima, set the machines up under a canvas canopy outside the hut, and hired 1, 2, 3, and eventually 4 male tailors to work at making shirts and trousers. The modest enterprise provided living wages for the tailors and their families, and a measure of profit, which was divided equally among the 3 wives. Qasim took no part in the running of the business, and he paid all the household expenses, so the money made by his wives was their own to spend or save as they wished. In time, the tailors bought slum huts around Qasim's own, and their wives and children lived side by side with Qasim's, making up a huge, extended family of 34 persons who looked upon the headman as father and friend. It was a relaxed and contented household. There was no bickering or bad temper. The children played happily and did their chores willingly. And several times a week, he opened his large main room to the public as a majlis, or forum, where the slum dwellers could air their grievances or make requests. Not all the disputes or problems in the slum were brought to Qasim Ali's house for a timely resolution, of course, and sometimes Qasim was forced to take on the roles of policeman and magistrate in that unofficial and self-regulating system. I was drinking tea in the foreground of his house one morning, some weeks after Abdullah took me to the lepers, when Jitendra rushed up to us with the news that a man was beating his wife, and it was feared that he might kill her. Qasim Ali, Jitendra, Anand, Prabhakar, and I walked quickly through the narrow lanes to a strip of huts that formed the perimeter of the slum at the line of mangrove swamp. A large crowd had gathered outside one of the huts and, as we neared it, we could hear a pitiable screaming and the smack of blows from within. Qasim Ali saw Johnny Cigar standing close to the hut, and pushed his way through the silent crowd to join him. "What's happening?" he demanded. "Joseph is drunk," Johnny replied sourly, spitting noisily in the direction of the hut. "The Bahanchud has been bashing his wife all morning." "All morning? How long has this been going on?" 3 hours, maybe longer. I just got here myself. The others told me about it. That's why I sent for you, Qasim Bhai."
Qasim Ali drew his brows together in a fierce frown, and stared angrily into Johnny's eyes.
"This is not the first time that Joseph has beaten his wife. Why didn't you stop it?" Johnny began, but he couldn't hold the stare, and he looked down at the stony ground at their feet. There was a kind of rage in him, and he looked close to tears. "I'm not afraid of him."
"I'm not afraid of any man here. You know that."
"But, they are, she is his wife." The slum dwellers lived in a dense, crowded proximity. The most intimate sounds and movements of their lives entwined, constantly, each with every other. And like people everywhere, they were reluctant to interfere in what we usually call domestic disputes, even when those so-called disputes became violent. Qasim Ali reached out and put a compassionate hand on Johnny's shoulder to calm him, and commanded that he stop Joseph's violence at once. Just then a new burst of shouting and blows came from the house, followed by a harrowing scream. Several of us stepped forward, determined to put a stop to the beating. Suddenly, the flimsy door of the hut crashed open, and Joseph's wife fell through the doorway and fainted at our feet. She was naked. Her long hair was wildly knotted and matted with blood. She'd been cruelly beaten with some kind of stick, and blue-red welts crossed and slashed her back, buttocks, and legs. The crowd flinched and recoiled in horror. They were as affected by her nakedness, I knew, as they were by the terrible wounds on her body. I was affected by it myself. In those years, nakedness was like a secret religion in India. No one but the insane or the sacred was ever publicly naked. Friends in the slum told me with unaffected honesty that they'd been married for years and had never seen their own wives naked. We were all stricken with pity for Joseph's wife, and shame passed among us, burning our eyes. A shout came from the hut then, and Joseph stumbled through the doorway. His cotton pants were stained with urine, and his t-shirt was torn and filthy. Wild, stupid drunkenness twisted his features. His hair was disheveled, and blood stained his face.
The bamboo stick he'd used to beat his wife was still in his hands.
He squinted in the sunlight, and then his blurred gaze fell on his wife's body, lying face down between himself and the crowd. He cursed her and took a step forward, raising the stick to strike her again. The shock that had paralyzed us escaped in a collective gasp, and we rushed forward to stop him. Surprisingly, little Prabaker was the first to reach Joseph, and he grappled with the much bigger man, pushing him backwards. The stick was wrenched from Joseph's hand, and he was held down on the ground. He thrashed and screamed, a string of violent curses spilling with the drool from his lips. A few women came forward, wailing as if in mourning. They covered Joseph's wife with a yellow silk sari, lifted her, and carried her away. The crowd might have become a lynch mob, then, but Qasim Ali took charge of the scene immediately. He ordered the people to disperse, or stand back, and he told the men who were holding Joseph to keep him pinned on the ground. His next command astonished me. I thought he might call for the police, or have Joseph taken away. Instead, he asked what alcohol Joseph had been drinking, and demanded that 2 bottles of it be brought to him. He also called for charas and a chillum, and told Johnny Cigar to prepare a smoke. When the rough, home-brewed alcohol, known as daru, was produced, he instructed Prabaker and Jitendra to force Joseph to drink. They sat Joseph in a circle of strong, young men, and offered him one of the bottles. He glared at them suspiciously for a few moments, but then snatched the bottle and took a long, greedy swig. The young men around him patted him on the back, encouraging him to drink more. He gulped down more of the extremely powerful daru and then tried to push it away, saying that he'd had enough. The young men became forceful in their coaxing. They laughed and joked with him, holding the bottle to his lips and driving it between his teeth. Johnny Cigar lit the chillum and passed it to Joseph. He smoked and drank and smoked again. Then, some 20 minutes after he'd first stumbled from the hut with the bloody stick in his hand, Joseph dipped his head and passed out cold on the rubble-strewn path. The crowd watched him snore for a while, and then they gradually drifted away to their huts and their jobs. Qasim told the group of young men to stay in their circle around Joseph's body and watch him closely. He left for about half an hour to perform the mid-morning prayer. When he returned, he ordered tea and water. Johnny Cigar, Anand, Rafiq, Prabaker, and Jitendra were in the watchful circle. A strong, young fisherman named Vijay was also in the group, and a lean, fit cart pusher known as Ankara, or Darkness, because of his luminously dark skin. They talked quietly while the sun rose to its zenith, and the sweltering humidity of the day clamped a moist grip on us all. I would have left then, but Qasim Ali asked me to stay, so I sat down under the shade of a canvas veranda. Vijay's 4-year-old daughter, Sunita, brought me a glass of water, without my asking for it. I sipped the lukewarm liquid gratefully. Sangli Mulji, I thanked her, in Marathi. Good girl, good girl. Sunita was delighted that she'd pleased me, and stared back at me with a furious little smiling frown. She wore a scarlet dress with the words "My cheeky faces" printed in English across the front. I noticed that the dress was torn, and too tight for her, and I made a mental note to buy some clothes for her and a few of the other kids in the cheap clothing bazaar, known as Fashion Street. It was the same mental note I made every day, every time I talked to the clever, happy kids in the slum. She took the empty glass and skipped away, the metal bells of her ankle bracelets jingling their small music, and her tiny, bare feet tough against the stones. When all the men had taken tea, Qasim Ali ordered them to wake Joseph. They began to prod and poke him roughly, shouting at him to wake up. He stirred and grumbled resentfully, waking very slowly. He opened his eyes and shook his groggy head, calling petulantly for water. Pani nahin, Kasim said. No water. They forced the second bottle on him, roughly insistent, but cajoling him with jokes and pats on the back. Another chillum was produced, and the young men smoked with him. He growled repeatedly for water. Every time, he found the strong alcohol thrust into his mouth instead.
Before a third of the bottle was finished, he fainted again, collapsing to the side with his head lolling at an awkward angle.
His face was bare to the climbing sun. No one made any attempt to shade him. Qasim Ali allowed him a mere 5 minutes to doze before ordering that he be woken. Joseph's grumbling was angry as he woke, and he began to snarl and curse. He tried to raise himself to his knees, and crawl back to his hut. Qasim Ali took the bloodied bamboo stick, and handed it to Johnny Cigar. He spoke one word of command. Begin. Johnny raised the stick, and brought it down on Joseph's back with a resounding smack. Joseph howled, and tried to crawl away, but the circle of young men pushed him back to the center of their group. Johnny struck him with the stick again. Joseph screamed angrily, but the young men slapped at him and shouted for silence. Johnny raised the stick, and Joseph cowered, trying to focus his bleary eyes. Do you know what you have done? Johnny demanded harshly. He brought the stick down with a whack on Joseph's shoulder. Speak, you drunken dog. Do you know what a terrible thing you have done? Stop hitting me. Joseph snarled. Why are you doing this? Do you know what you have done? Johnny repeated. The stick struck again. Ow, ah. Joseph shrieked. What? What have I done? I've done nothing. Vijay took the stick, and beat Joseph on the upper arm. You beat your wife, you drunken pig. You beat her, and maybe she will die. He passed the stick to Jitendra, who used it to smack Joseph on the thigh. She's dying. You are a murderer. You murdered your own wife. Joseph tried to shield himself with his arms, casting his eyes about feverishly for some escape. Jitendra lifted the stick again. You beat your wife all morning, and threw her naked from the hut. Take that, you drunkard. And that, just as you beat her. How do you like it, you murderer? The slow creep of a foggy comprehension stiffened Joseph's face into a terrified anguish. Jitendra passed the stick to Prabhakar, and the next blow brought tears. Oh, no, he sobbed. It's not true. I haven't done anything. Oh, what will happen to me? I didn't mean to kill her. God in heaven, what will happen to me? Give me water. I need water. No water, Qasim Ali said. The stick came down again and again. It was in Ankara's hand. Worrying about yourself, dog? What about your poor wife? You didn't worry when you beat her. This is not the first time you took this stick to her, is it? Now it is finished. You killed her. You can never beat her again, not her or anyone. You will die in the jail. Johnny Cigar took the stick again. Such a big, strong fellow you are. So brave to beat your wife, who is half your size. Come on and beat me, hero. Come on, take this stick of yours, and beat a man with it, you cheap gunda. Water, Joseph blubbered, collapsing to the ground in tears of self-pity. No water, Qasim Ali said, and Joseph drifted into unconsciousness once more. When they woke him the next time, Joseph had been in the sun for almost 2 hours, and his distress was great. He shouted for water, but they offered him only the daru bottle. I could see that he wanted to refuse it, but his thirst was becoming desperate. He accepted the bottle with trembling hands. Just as the first drops touched his parched tongue, the stick came down again. Daru spilled over his stubbled chin, and ran from his gaping mouth. He dropped the bottle. Johnny picked it up and poured the remaining alcohol over his head. Joseph shrieked and tried to scramble away on his hands and knees, but the circle of men wrestled him back to the center. Jitendra wielded the stick, smacking it onto his buttocks and legs. Joseph whined and wept and moaned. Qasim Ali was sitting to one side, in the shaded doorway of a hut. He called Prabhakar to him, and gave orders that a number of Joseph's friends and relatives should be sent for, as well as relatives of Maria, Joseph's wife. As the people arrived, they took the places of the young men in the circle, and Joseph's torment continued. For several hours, his friends and relatives and neighbors took turns to vilify and accuse him, beating him with the stick he'd used to assault his wife so savagely. The blows were sharp, and they hurt him, but they weren't severe enough to break the skin. It was a measured punishment that was painful, but never vicious. I left the scene, and returned a few times during the afternoon. Many of the slum dwellers who were passing that way stopped to watch. People joined the circle around Joseph, or left it, as they wished. Qasim Ali sat in the doorway of the hut, his back straight and his expression grave, never taking his eyes from the circle. He directed the punishment with a quiet word or a subtle gesture, keeping a relentless pressure on the man, but preventing any excesses. Joseph passed out twice more before he finally broke down. When the end came, he was crushed. All the spite and defiance in him were defeated. He sobbed the name of his wife over and over again. Maria, Maria, Maria. Qasim Ali stood and approached the circle. It was the moment he'd waited for, and he nodded to Vijay, who brought a dish of warm water, soap, and 2 towels from a nearby hut. The same men who'd been beating Joseph cradled him in their arms, then, and washed his face, neck, hands, and feet. They gave him water. They combed his hair. They soothed him with hugs and the first kind words he'd heard since the beginning of his chastisement. They told him that if he were genuinely sorry he would be forgiven, and given help. Many people were brought forward, myself included, and Joseph was made to touch our feet. They dressed him in a clean shirt, and propped him up, their arms and shoulders supporting him tenderly. Qasim Ali squatted close to him, and stared into his bloodshot eyes. "Your wife, Maria, is not dead," Qasim Ali said softly. Not dead?" he mumbled. "No, Joseph, she is not dead. She is very badly injured, but she is alive. Thank God, thank God. The women of your family, and Maria's family, have decided what is to be done," Qasim said slowly, firmly. "Are you sorry? Do you know what you have done to your wife, and are you sorry for it?" "Yes, Qasim Bhai," Joseph wept. "I'm so sorry, so sorry. The women have decided that you must not see Maria for 2 months. She is very ill. You almost killed her, and she must take 2 months to recover. In this time, you will work every day. You will work long hours and hard. You will save your money. You will not drink even 1 drop of daru or beer or anything but water. Do you understand? No chai or milk or anything but water. You must observe this fast, as part of your punishment." Joseph wagged his head feebly. Yes, I will. Maria may decide not to take you back. You must know this also. She may want to divorce you, even after the 2 months, and if she does, I will help her in this. But at the end of 2 months, if she wants to accept you again, you will use the money you have saved by this extra hard work, and you will take her on a holiday to the cool mountains. During retreat in that place, with your wife, you will face this ugliness in yourself, and you will try to overcome it. Inshallah, you will make a happy and virtuous future, for your wife and yourself. This is the decision. Go now. No more talking. Eat now, and sleep." Qasim stood, turned, and walked away. Joseph's friends helped him to his feet, and half carried him to his hut. The hut had been cleaned, and all of Maria's clothes and personal articles had been removed. Joseph was given rice and dal. He ate a little of it, and then lay back on his thin mattress. 2 friends sat near him, and fanned his unconscious body with green paper fans. A cord was tied around one end of the bloody stick, and Johnny Cigar suspended it from a post outside Joseph's hut for all to see. It would remain there for the 2 months of Joseph's further punishment. Someone turned a radio on in a hut not far away, and a Hindi love song wailed through the lanes and gullies of the busy slum. A child was crying somewhere. Chickens scratched and pecked at the place where Joseph's circle of torment had been. Somewhere else, a woman was laughing, children played, the bangle seller sang out his enticement call in Marathi. A bangle is beauty, and beauty is a bangle. As the pulse and push of normal life returned to the slum, I walked back to my hut, through the winding lanes. Fishermen and fisherwomen were coming home from Sassoon Dock, bringing baskets of sea smell with them. In one of those balancing contrasts of slum life, it was also the hour chosen by the incense sellers to move through the lanes, burning their samples of sandalwood, jasmine, rose, and patchouli. I thought about what I'd seen that day, what the people did for themselves in their tiny city of 25,000 souls, without policemen, judges, courts, and prisons. I thought about something Qasim Ali had said, weeks before, when the two boys, Farouk and Raghuram, had presented themselves for punishment, having spent a day tied together in work at the latrine. After they'd scrubbed themselves clean with a hot bucket bath, and dressed in new lungies and clean, white singlets, the two boys stood before an assembly of their families, friends, and neighbors. Lamplights fluttered in the breeze, passing the golden gleam from eye to eye, as shadows chased one another across the reed mat walls of the huts. Qasim Ali pronounced the punishment that had been decided upon by a council of Hindu and Muslim friends and neighbors. Their punishment, for fighting about religion, was that each had to learn one complete prayer from the religious observances of the other. In this way is justice done, Qasim Ali said that night, his bark-colored eyes softening on the two young men, because justice is a judgment that is both fair and forgiving. Justice is not done until everyone is satisfied, even those who offend us and must be punished by us. You can see, by what we have done with these two boys, that justice is not only the way we punish those who do wrong. It is also the way we try to save them. I knew those words by heart. I'd written them down in my work journal, not long after Qasim Ali had spoken them. And when I returned to my hut on that day of Maria's agonies, that day of Joseph's shame, I lit a lamp, and opened the black journal, and stared at the words on the page. Somewhere close to me, sisters and friends comforted Maria, and fanned her bruised and beaten body. In Joseph's hut, Prabaker and Johnny Cigar took the first shift to watch over their neighbor as he slept. It was hot, then, as evening's long shadows became the night. I breathed a stillness of air, dusty and fragrant with scents from cooking fires. And it was quiet, in those dark, thinking moments. Quiet enough to hear sweat droplets from my sorrowed face fall upon the page, one after another, each wet circle weeping outward into the words fair, forgiving, punish, and save. Chapter 12. 1 week became 3 weeks, and 1 month became 5. From time to time, as I worked the streets of Colaba with my tourist clients, I ran into Didier, or Vikram, or some of the others from Leopold's. Sometimes I saw Carla, but I never spoke to her. I didn't want to meet her eyes while I was poor, and living in the slum. Poverty and pride are devoted blood brothers until one, always and inevitably, kills the other. I didn't see Abdullah at all during that 5th month, but a succession of strange and occasionally bizarre messengers came to the slum with news of him. I was sitting alone at the table in my hut one morning, writing, when the ghetto dogs roused me from my work with a fury of barking more frenzied than anything I'd ever heard. There was rage and terror in it. I put down my pen, but didn't open my door or even move from my chair. The dogs were often vicious at night, but that was the first time I'd ever heard such ferocity in the daylight hours. The sound was fascinating and alarming. As I perceived that the pack was coming nearer and slowly nearer to my hut, my heart began to thump. Shafts of golden morning stabbed through rents and gaps in the fragile reed walls of my hut. Those mote-filled rays stuttered and strobed as people rushed past in the lane outside. Shouts and screams joined the howling. I looked around me. The only weapon of any kind in my small house was a thick bamboo stick. I picked it up. The riot of barking and voices concentrated outside my hut, and seemed to be centered on my door. I pulled open the thin piece of plywood I used as a door, and dropped the stick at once. There, half a meter away, was a huge, brown bear. The animal towered over me, filling the doorway with awesome, muscled fur. It stood easily on its hind legs, with its enormous paws raised to the height of my shoulders. The presence of the beast provoked the ghetto dogs to madness. Not daring to come within reach, they turned on one another in their fierce rage. Ignoring them and the excited crowd of people, the bear stooped and leaned in toward the doorway to stare into my eyes. Its eyes were large, sentient, and topaz-colored. It growled. Far from threatening, the bear's growl was a rumbling, tumbling, oddly soothing roll of sound, more eloquent than the prayer that muttered through my mind. My fear slipped away as I listened to it. Across that half-meter of air, I felt the reverberations of the feral noise throb against my chest. It leaned closer until its face and mine were centimeters apart. Froth dissolved to liquid, and dripped from its wet, black jaws. The bear meant me no harm. Somehow, I was sure of it. The eyes of the beast were speaking of something else. It was seconds only, but in that thudding stillness the communication of an animal sadness, undiluted by reason and complete in its passion, was so intense and pure, from eye to eye, that it seemed much longer, and I wanted it to go on. The dogs slashed at one another, whining and howling in agony of hate and fear, wanting to rip at the bear, but more afraid than in rage. Children screamed, and people scrambled to avoid the thrashing dogs. The bear turned, ponderously slow, but then lashed out swiftly and swept a massive paw at the dogs. The dogs scattered, and a number of young men seized the opportunity to drive them further away with stones and sticks. The bear swayed from side to